The war between the Wraith and the Lantians sadly shows a lot of the flaws for the race of gate builders. We saw their carelessness when their actions led to the rise of the Wraith as a species. Their arrogance when believing their ship's invincible sent them deeper and deeper into Wraith space, which resulted in the Wraith gaining 3 0-point modules, which they use at a cloning facility to grow their armies hundreds of times its original size, forever turning the war in favor of the Wraith. Finally, we saw the Lantians' inability to adapt. As for all their technological wonders, they could never find the magic bullet that would end the war. That being said, they did come up with some interesting ideas. Project Arcturus and the nanite replicators being some of the more well-known plans, but the one that could have been the magic bullet to end the war was the Attero Device. But due to a side effect, they decided not to use it. A choice that may have cost them not only the war, but their civilization. However, I see a lot of people point out how this is stupid, and how the Lantians could have used the device and overcome this side effect. There's a lot of criticism to throw at the Lantians, but in this video, I want to come to their aid. Not so much defense, but looking at their reasoning. To do that, I want to cover two ideas. Firstly, I don't think the Attero Device was necessarily the key to ending the war that many see it as. I'm not saying the device was useless or had no value, but I think there's some key points people miss when they talk about the device, which kind of lessens its potential as a weapon of war. Which will lead into point 2, which is why the Attero Device shows why the Lantians ultimately could not win the war. Starting off, what is the Attero Device, what did it do, and what caused the Lantians to abandon it? The history of the Attero Device isn't too well documented. We know it was created by the Lantian Janus 10,000 years ago, who ran a 3-day test of the device and shut off due to unforeseen side effects. And he didn't just stop the test, he shut down the whole project. It's not clear if the other Lantians knew about the project beforehand, but given both Todd and the Veneer knew about it, it's likely the Council knew about it after the test as well. Though from what little we have seen, it seems it was Janus who shut down the project and not the Council. Though given what happened, I don't entirely blame him. Okay, enough mystery. What does the device do, and what caused it to be shut down? The idea behind the device is pretty genius. It disrupts very specific subspace frequencies the Wraith use in their hyperdrives. What really makes this device genius is that it doesn't stop the Wraith from going into hyperspace, but when they try... Given the Lantians were being pushed back on all fronts, this would have ground the Wraith's advancement to a halt. And I've seen some say if the device had stayed on, it could have led to the extinction of the Wraith as a species. But of course, something went wrong, so what was it? Well, the device's side effect was it was causing Stargates to explode when used. This was caused by a form of radiation the device creates that causes energy to rapidly build up behind the event horizon of a Stargate, causing them to explode. And not just explode with a force to destroy buildings, the Stargates were exploding with the force of a dozen nuclear warheads. Something to keep in mind during the Lantian Wraith War, there was a population of humans living in the Pegasus galaxy, ones who used gate travel a lot more compared to the humans in the Milky Way. It's most likely the horror caused by the destruction of countless human civilizations, as well as some Lantian worlds, that made the Lantians, or at the very least Janus, shut down the project. Deciding the cost of human/Lantian life outweighed the possibility of winning the war.
But they didn't have the stomach to leave it on once they realized how many of their precious Stargates it would destroy. How many humans it would kill.
However, a common thought I've seen from people is that this is stupid. There's a few reasons I've seen, so I'll go through and compile them together. Mainly that if the issue with the Attero Device is that it causes Stargates to explode, then just shut down the Stargates. Which we did see is possible in Atlantis' sister show, SG-1. In the episode Avenger 2.0, Stargate Command uploaded a virus to a DHD, one that would make the gate inoperable. The System Lord Ball altered the virus and spread throughout the whole gate system, and almost brought the whole system down. And that virus was made on computers from the year 2003. The Lantians, the ones who built the gate system in the first place, should have no problem turning them off. From there, they can activate the Attero Device and either A, wait the Wraith out as they would be stuck and starve, B, take the fight to them, or C, some combination of the two. But as I said earlier, I think there are some problems with this idea, mainly two. First is I don't think there is a way to shut down the gate system. If they had a way to do it, they probably would have used it. As for uploading a virus into the system, keep in mind, Avenger was an invasive program designed to break the DHD. I have an idea why the Lantians wouldn't do this, but it's a point I'm going to cover later, so just put a pin in it for the moment and we'll circle back. This leaves us with the issue that if the device is used, countless human civilizations would be wiped out along with the Wraith. Now, this gets into a morality debate that really has no correct answer. Do you sacrifice possibly most of the humans in the Pegasus galaxy to stop the Wraith? Or not and let them be dominated and fed on by the Wraith? While the Lantians could warn their worlds and some human worlds about the danger of using the gates, it's possible there were some human civilizations in Pegasus that had developed spaceflight and had interstellar communication. The truth is you can't warn them all unless you want the Wraith to also find out what is going on. Which is an interesting point to consider. If the Wraith see their ships start blowing up when they try to enter hyperspace, they can contact each other and warn them of the situation. But with human worlds lower on the tech tree, they will not have interstellar communication and rely on the gate for galactic news. The only thing they might notice is a lack of people coming through the gate, and if they try to dial out to find out what is going on, well, suddenly that won't be their biggest problem anymore. So do you keep the device on and sacrifice countless human worlds to potentially stop the Wraith?
Forgive us. This is the only way.
And let's say the Lanteans did shut the gates down. We can assume that humans using the gates are doing so for travel and trade. If they shut down the gate system suddenly, all trade comes to a halt. Suddenly you're faced with the possibility of human civilizations collapsing depending on how dependent they are on trade. Now all this stuff is a moral kind of gray stuff that doesn't have a clear black and white answer, which is why I'm not going to give a definitive answer, but I'll be curious to see what people say in the comments. The second problem I see with the argument that the Attero Device could have won the Lantians the war is that, well, it probably couldn't have. The idea behind the device is genius. It brings the Wraith advancement to a grinding halt and prevents retreat. All Wraith ships would be stuck wherever they were when the device was activated, or else they risk blowing up, and that's if they learn about what is going on. However, the device is also kind of a one-trick pony. Sure, it stops the Wraith's advancements and greatly weakens them, but it doesn't destroy all Wraith with a flip of the switch. I talked earlier about the Lantians' options, starving them, attacking, or a combination of the two. The starving method isn't a bad idea. The Wraith's biggest weakness has always been their food supply. However, the Wraith can go several weeks without food. Yes, they get weaker over time, but they can last a lot longer than a human would with no food. And we're assuming they would have no access to food. Sure, some Wraith ships might find themselves isolated, but others could be close enough to human/Lantian worlds to travel via sublight to gather food. Granted, if the Stargates are still exploding, that could be an issue for the Wraith. In fact, it could be seen as a reason to keep the side effect in place. But the Wraith do store some of their food on their ships. If they ration properly or go into hibernation, they don't have to worry about food for at least a little bit. Point is, if it comes down to a waiting game, and if the Wraith play their cards right, it's a game they can play. For the second idea of attacking the Wraith, that idea has more potential for success. The Lantians always had the technological upper hand, and could win almost any individual battle. So with the Wraith ships being stuck and unable to come together, the Lantians can pick off the individual or smaller ship groups and retake certain systems. However, the issue the Lantians had in the war was they could never match the Wraith in numbers. At some point they will reach systems with heavy Wraith forces, ones that will require a large force to deal with, which could lead to a siege kind of battle, where the Lantians go in and destroy what ships they can, leave when they take too much damage, and come back later. Something like this could take time, and again would require a large number of ships pulling forces away from other fronts. And it's that time thing I want to focus on, because all these ideas, starving, attacking, or both, require time. Time the Wraith would need to find a workaround. This is a point I haven't seen people make. The Wraith are rather technologically genius people. Not that their tech is superior to anyone else's. In fact, their biotech seems weaker compared to races with more mechanical-based technology. But they are pretty good at coming up with unique solutions to the problems, kind of like the Tari. For example, when they stole the 3 ZPMs and worked them into their own tech, or when they hacked into the Asuran code to make them stop attacking them, or when they managed to invade Midway Station and ultimately the SGC. A really good example was after 3 uses of the Asgard teleportation technology, the Wraith were able to come up with countermeasures. Granted, this is something they could have learned during their war with the Vanir, but this still implies they learned how to counter this technology. If given enough time, I believe the Wraith could have found some way to counter the Attero Device, and once that is done, the war would continue. And again, I want to be clear on something. I'm not saying the Attero Device is useless or anything like that. Of all the attempts by the Lantians to find a way to win the war, this was probably the best. However, it suffered from 2 problems. First is the whole blowing up Stargate thing, but there's a second one I think people have overlooked.
What?
The imperfection every weapon has its user.
I don't think the Attero Device would have won the Lantians the war. Not because they were unwilling to use it or it was a bad device, but because they didn't have the mindset to use it correctly. This might be a little hard to explain, but keep in mind, while the Lantians are the first evolution of humanity in the known universe, they're not really like humans from Earth. Let's pull that pin from earlier. Why didn't they just shut down the gate system? I think it was because the thought never crossed their minds. Either due to their alien origins, cultural differences, or how advanced their civilization was, their mindset is different from ours. Thorkai sums this up perfectly.
We cannot think like you.
Actually, the failures of the Asgard in their war with the Replicators kind of mirrors the ones the Lantians did in their war with the Wraith. Both ended up trying to find advanced solutions to their problems, when the solutions require a more simplistic kind of thinking, like shutting down the gates. Which, if you want to get real simplistic about it, they could have just buried the gates so they couldn't be activated in the first place. Another interesting thing about the Lantians, if you look at their history, going all the way back to them being the Alterans in the Ori Galaxy, they had a tendency to try and create super advanced technology, but they would completely abandon projects that had defects. We've talked about the Attero Device, but let's look at the Asurans, or Replicators. They nearly brought the Wraith down twice, yet their creators didn't view them as the weapon they wanted, so they tried to wipe them out. Granted, I can see why they might be hesitant about creating an army of self-aware, self-replicating robots, but there were other ways they could have used them besides frontline duty. For example, the Asurans could have helped increase ship production, which was the Lantians' main issue in the war. Looking a little further into their past, they had something of a turbulent history with time travel. Even though by the end Janus had a decent working time machine, the rest of the Council rejected any use of said technology. Again, they had a tendency to try and build super powerful technology, the Ark of Truth, Dakara's superweapon, and the Stargates, but when these super devices had issues, they threw them to the side. Now, I will grant a big problem here is lack of info. We don't know much about the research Janus did on the Attero Device after the project was shut down. He did have a history of doing projects in secret. Perhaps he did look more into it and conclude there was no way to use the Attero Device without the side effect of blowing up Stargates. However, as I talked about earlier, there was a low-ish level idea to stop that problem. But the Lantians were so stuck on making bigger or more advanced solutions to win the war that the thought never crossed their mind. But when you are fighting a war of attrition with an enemy that can outproduce you in ships and manpower, you can't waste time and resources on mega projects. Their technology was already superior to the Wraiths, they just needed to find a way to match their numbers. The truth is, while the Attero Device could have bought the Lantians time to find other solutions and reclaim some lost territory, or even the most extreme scenario victory, they probably would have wasted it. Now, I grant this is kind of a big claim to make, one that is hard to prove, as we run into the issue again of a lack of information from the war. we really only get tidbits of info from it. However, keep in mind when they held the advantage, they recklessly sent their ships into Wraith space, which caused the whole issue of greater Wraith numbers in the first place. You could say they learned their lesson, but given they spent the rest of the war trying over and over to make some super weapon to win the war, I have to ask, would they? And let's circle back to the Lantian incursions into Wraith space for a second. What was the actual goal? I get the general idea to destroy any Wraith, but the Wraith are basically nomads who live in city ships that, well, move. So was the plan to send the ships in and just destroy any hive ships they came across? And just to nip this point in the bud now, pile jumpers being used as scouts to find hive ships. I don't think this was done. While I agree that would have been a smart move and was most likely done at some point in the mid to late war, when Todd talks about the early phase of the war, he's clearly talking about the Lantians sending the Aurora-class warships in. Sure, he might not have known they were there, but if they were, I doubt the Lantians would have lost 3 ZPMs. My point is, they really didn't have a strategy besides destroying Wraith. And if they used the Attero Device, they would probably go back to this idea. A general pushback of all Wraith forces, which isn't a bad idea, regain lost territory and weaken the Wraith. But when the Wraith find a way to overcome the device, which you should plan for since the Lantians underestimated the Wraith once, and look what happened, they'll just come back. The war might last a little longer, but the Wraith would still be victorious in the end. The best move would to be specifically target Wraith hive ships now that they are isolated, or the cloning facility that gave the Wraith the edge. Granted, the Lantians might not know about it, but they have to be a little curious about where all these Wraith forces came from. But knowing the Lantians, they would probably do a general attack order and sure push back the Wraith, but as I've stated a few times now, the Wraith will find a counter. One example, here's one. On the Lantians' general attack of all Wraith forces, a few of their ships get captured. The Lantians are tortured until someone who knows tells them about the Attero Device. They use whatever knowledge these Lantians have to try and adjust their hyperdrives, or if that fails, force the Lantians to use their ships to get where the device is and destroy it. And if you don't think that could happen, I encourage you to read the short story Consort, where Todd uses a similar tactic to get the Asurans to stand down. Yes, I know a lot of people don't count the books as canon. I like that one and it makes a lot of sense. You know what? I'm declaring it canon.
She can't do that. Shoot her or something.
At the start of the video, I talked about how the Lantians couldn't adapt. And that's my whole point. They couldn't change to a new scenario and kept using a losing strategy while they tried to find some magic bullet to defeat the Wraith. But in war, there's no such thing as a magic bullet. While technology might influence who wins a battle or war, it's not the only influence. I'm not saying numbers win a battle either. In fact, throughout history there are plenty of examples when larger forces were defeated by smaller ones, and sometimes superior technology played a factor. But wasn't that tech alone that won the battle or war? It was the strategy they used that complemented their advantages, whether it be technology or numbers. To wrap this video up, I want to use a real historical example from the American Civil War. The South could have won the war, there's a few reasons they lost. An interesting one brought up in the Checkmate Lincolnites YouTube series, specifically in the episode about Union and Confederate generals. To quickly sum up the points in that video, most Confederate generals favored big flashy battles that looked good in the panels of history, but more often than not kind of wasted men and resources on battles that in the long run didn't mean anything. Meanwhile, most Union generals, especially near the end of the war with Grant and Sherman, were more strategic. They looked at the war with a wider view and worked to force an end to the war as quickly as possible. Sometimes this did mean using their superior numbers, but also making more strategically minded moves. Getting back to Stargate, I think this sums up why the Attero Device would not have won the Lantians the war.
You were obsessing over tactics while we were planning strategies. You thought small, we thought big. That's why we won.
But those are just my thoughts on this. I'm definitely curious to read the comments and see what everyone has to say on this. Do you agree with my thoughts, or do you think the Lantians could have pulled a win in the end? Again, tell me your thoughts in the comments below. Leave a like and subscribe. Follow me on my social medias. And remember,
You still alive?
I think so. I'd hate to think heaven looks like this.
Who says we went to heaven?